Hope you are all doing well. And thank you so much for joining us for this wonderful virtual presentation. So this is a presentation of the Bar Harbor Whale Watch's Grand Slam Lighthouse Cruise, which includes both US and Canadian lighthouses. My name is Julie Taylor. I'm the lead naturalist at the Bar Harbor Whale Watch Company. I've been here for about 15 years. So though we normally offer this presentation in the form of an all-day cruise, so due to, of course, COVID-19, we've had to get a little creative, but you are certainly in for an incredible presentation this evening. I'm really excited. Hope you are too. But just to give you a quick snapshot of what this experience would normally entail. So the Grand Slam Lighthouse Cruise, we normally see about 17, 18 lighthouses. It's an all-day boat ride adventure along the down east coast of Maine. So we're based in Bar Harbor on Mount Desert Island. So we start here in Bar Harbor and head up the coast, and you'll hear about what that, or you'll see what that adventure looks like throughout the presentation here. But we go all the way.
They're doing a virtual lighthouse cruise. I'm
sorry if I could interrupt for a second. Everybody you should have yourselves muted until we get to the Q&A at the end. If you're not muted.
Awesome, thanks. So we go all the way up to Lubec, over typically to Petit Manan, and see some pretty incredible and iconic lighthouses. In addition to coastal scenery and marine life such as puffins, sometimes we see whales because we go offshore. And so it's just an amazing trip. It's one of my highlights of the summer. And we travel on the Friendship 5, which is this boat right here. It's our 112-foot jet-propelled catamaran. And this is a photography cruise as well. So that's the other really awesome aspect of this cruise. And tonight we also have the talented Mike Leonard of Photo Tourism by Mike, who offers a free photography workshop the evening before the cruise and rides along to give photography tips and advice to each lighthouse we visit during the cruise. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike for a moment so he can talk a bit about his role with us during the cruise and the wonderful photography aspect of the trip.
Well, thank you, Julie, and I'm very happy to be on board, and I just wish that we could be on board tonight. Beautiful day to be aboard the boat. But I just wanted to talk a little about the photography aspect. A lot of the pictures you're going to see in tonight's presentation are actually from past Grand Slam Lighthouse tours. And these are the type shots that you could make if you were on board the boat. What makes this truly unique about a photography cruise is we stop at every lighthouse and position the boat to get the very best look angle. Then we rotate the boat 360 degrees so everybody on board gets a good shot of the lighthouse before we move on to the next one. That's the difference between a photography cruise and a harbor cruise. So if you're a photographer, as I am, and I know a lot of you probably all carry cameras, always look for the photography cruise. And speaking of photography cruise, I want to share my screen really quick because, you know, this year a lot of things got canceled, but there is actually one thing that is still going. Hopefully you're able to see my screen. There is going to be a lighthouse photography cruise that's happening out of Booth Bay Harbor on what would normally be Maine Open Lighthouse Day. That's Saturday, September 12th, and this leaves the Pier 8 at 6 a.m. It's a real early start. But the reason for that is most lighthouses in Maine face east. Well, what better time to get pictures of them than in the morning when the sun rises in the east? So we get to see 4 lighthouses in the Booth Bay Harbor region. It's about a 2-hour cruise, and they're taking reservations now. So I'd urge you to call, make a note of the phone number, it's on the screen, and give them a call, or you can go to balmydayscruises.com and you can book that. It is a photography cruise. And like I say, it's only 4 lighthouses, but it's a lot of fun. And this is, I think, the 5th year that we've done it. And it's usually, it goes rain or shine. So it's the only photography cruise, lighthouse photography cruise happening in the state at this point. So, all right, I'm going to stop this share and I'm going to hand it back to Julie. But thank you so much for this opportunity, and I hope you all enjoyed the images tonight. And back to you, Julie.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. So yeah, that is awesome. Thank you so much. So if you are interested in booking for 2021, those trips are available in our Grand Slam and the two other lighthouse cruises we offer, especially lighthouse cruises. And you can visit our website, barharborwales.com, to get more information. I'm also available during the Q&A part later if you have any questions. And then you can also reserve there if you want. And at this point, also, I want to introduce Jeff Gales. And he's the executive director of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. So he is also joining us. And this organization has played a pivotal role in the preservation and restoration of U.S. lighthouse stations, as well as educating the public about these incredible and historical icons. And we also have Skip Sherwood, who I've had the pleasure of working with over the last couple of years. And he heads the U.S. Lighthouse Society Passport Program, which you might be already involved in. But I just wanted to also let Skip talk about this really great part of the U.S. Lighthouse Society's way in which to educate and have folks record their visits to these really wonderful lighthouses. So I'll turn it over to you, Skip, for a moment.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Just real quick, I just wanted to give some kudos to Bar Harbor Whale Watch for being one of the big supporters of the Passport Program. The money that you donate to them actually comes back to the Society. And if you take enough of their trips, you will be able to fill probably a complete passport book. So I just wanted to jump in and make sure that everybody realizes the work that they do, to make the Passport Program a success. And if you ever have any questions about the Passport Program, call Jeff Gales, okay? All right, Julie, thanks.
Thanks so much, Skip. Okay, now to introduce our amazing speaker for this evening, Jeremy D'Entremont. Okay, Jeremy hails from a historical coastal city near and dear to my heart, and that is Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He is the president historian of the American Lighthouse Foundation and founder of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. He is the co-author of more than 20 books, including The Lighthouses of Maine, Great Shipwrecks of the Maine Coast, and the Lighthouse Handbook, New England. I also have one of his amazing books here. Oh, sorry, I can't really see that, but sorry, cuts out.
Zoom does some strange things there.
So he also hosts a wonderful podcast entitled The Lighthearted that features stories of U.S. lighthouses through interviews with people closely connected with the lighthouse station, such as keepers, historians, scientists, and fellow lighthouse enthusiasts. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for being here, for doing this.
They do any overnight cruises?
I don't know.
Oh, I think we will definitely talk about that towards the end, but I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Julie. And yeah, we'll save Q&A for the end because I've got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm gonna probably kind of talk kind of fast because I got to talk about 17 lighthouses, and I don't want to keep you here all night. But it's a pleasure to be here. And like Mike, I wish we could be on the boat tomorrow. If this was a more normal summer, we'd be on the boat all day tomorrow. So I look forward to seeing a lot of you on board next year. Julie just mentioned the podcast. I just want to mention that the podcast Lighthearted is the official podcast of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. It's on every week. I post the new episodes on Mondays. There's been about 80 episodes so far. Go to news.uslhs.org to hear that. And I'm going to mention it a few more times during the presentation tonight because some of the episodes have pertained to some of the lighthouses I'm talking about tonight. So just a little groundwork before I start the cruise tonight, before we leave the dock. Little basic stuff about lighthouses. There are about 850 lighthouses in the U.S. approximately half of which are still federal aids to navigation. All the active lights are automated today, meaning there are no more traditional lighthouse keepers living at the lighthouses. And all of the active lighthouses in the US were automated by about 1990, with one exception, that's Boston Light, which was automated in 1998, but remains the only light station in the United States that still has an official keeper employed by the federal government. There are more than 21,000 lighthouses in the world. Don't ask me for an exact count because nobody knows. There are about 750 lighthouses in Canada, so they have almost as many as we do. And in Canada, a number of the stations are still staffed, still have resident keepers. 51 stations in Canada have resident keepers, 27 on the West Coast in BC, 23 in Newfoundland and Labrador, and 1 in New Brunswick, which I'll be talking about tonight. The lights are automated, but it's largely for security purposes. They have resident keepers. They are often involved in rescues and so forth. For quite a few years, the US government has been getting out of the business of caring for historic lighthouses. Under the Maine Lights program in the 90s, more than 20 lighthouses in Maine were transferred to new owners, largely nonprofits and local town governments, some to the state of Maine. In 2001, the federal government passed the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, and under that act, more lighthouses have been transferred. And Susan Bentley just started screen sharing and should get out of that. Susan Bentley, please stop screen sharing. So under the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, many more lighthouses have been transferred to new owners. If the lighthouses are still active aids to navigation, the Coast Guard continues to manage the lights and fog signals. Again, I believe that's Susan Bentley and screen sharing. Are other people seeing Susan's screen? Yeah, Susan Bentley, if you can hear me, go to the top of your screen and get out of screen sharing, because we're all seeing your screen. Under the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, thank you. Yeah, if there are no suitable applicants for a property, they're sold via online auction to the high bidder. Quite a few remote offshore lighthouses have been auctioned through this process. So I'm going to get into the presentation at this point, and I'm going to get into screen sharing. And here we go. And you should see Grand Slam Cruise. Julie, nod your head, Julie, if you're seeing that. Now I'm wondering why I'm not seeing myself up there in the little window, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm still seeing you, Julie, up there. But are you seeing me in the little window next to you? Are okay. I'm not sure why it doesn't really matter. But anyway, so let me get into the cruise here, and I'll start with the map. This is the map from last year's Grand Slam cruise. And you'll notice it says US and Canada Grand Slam 18 Lighthouse Photography Tour. I'm going to talk about 17 lighthouses tonight. We were scheduled to see 17 lighthouses in this year's cruise. The tour route itinerary does vary a bit from year to year. We do pretty much the same route on the American part of it, but the Canadian route varies a bit. Sometimes we go around Campobello Island, and sometimes we go around Grand Manan. So what I'm going to do tonight is give you kind of a dream cruise. I'm going to combine the two and tell you about what I think are the most interesting of the Canadian lights. So on this map, I'm not talking about every single lighthouse. The ones I'm not talking about are Bliss Islands and Wolves Islands, but I'm talking about all the other ones you see on this map. So let me get right into the lighthouses. And the photos I'm showing are mostly mine, but some of Mike Leonard's will be in the presentation as well. And I'm going to give him the opportunity to comment if he would like to. So this is Egg Rock, which is usually the first lighthouse we see on these cruises, but is sometimes saved for last. It is the nearest lighthouse to Bar Harbor. Let me show you where it is on the map on the lower left there. And here's a closer map showing it to the east of Mount Desert Island and to the west of the Schoodic Peninsula at the entrance to Frenchman's Bay. And the island is named for the large number of seabird nests and eggs found there. And when it was originally built, it looked very different. This is a picture from the National Archives. It was a short square brick tower in the center of a one-story keeper's dwelling. The first keeper, Ambrose Wasgett, was a Bar Harbor native. He had been wounded twice in the Civil War, and he was at Egg Rock for about a decade. Very soon, just a few months after the station went into service, there was a huge storm in March 1876 that smashed the windows of the dwelling, moved the fog bell tower that you see to the left of the lighthouse there, moved it about 30 feet and swept away a fuel shed. And Keeper Wasgett noted in the station's log that the island was, quote, swept of anything movable. And you see statements like that over and over again in the log for this lighthouse. The dwelling was altered around 1900. A second story was added. The original roof was replaced with a roof with dormer windows that's still there today. Fog is a frequent problem, of course, and a lot of the Maine coast. Around here, there's a lot of fog. A powerful first-class foghorn was established in 1904 after the grounding of the battleship Massachusetts nearby. Joseph Pulitzer had an estate in Bar Harbor at that time, and he complained about the noise of the foghorn, and some other people did too, so it was aimed away from Bar Harbor. The horn was in operation for 1,813 hours in the year 1907, the equivalent of 75 full days, or more than 20% of the time. Keepers at Egg Rock had to row to Bar Harbor, which was about 4 miles away, for supplies, which could be treacherous at times. This is Clinton Dalzell, better known as Buster Dalzell, a native of Vinyl Haven, Maine, and an Army veteran. And he arrived at Egg Rock as an assistant in 1933, 1933. And a couple of years later, in February 1935, when he was 28, he left for the mainland to pick up batteries for a boat motor. And the principal keeper realized a while later that he was missing. He hadn't come back. There was a search with the police and the Coast Guard. They eventually found his boat overturned. They're not sure exactly what happened, but somehow his boat overturned as several weeks went by before his body was recovered. And sadly, his third child was born 3 weeks after his death. So I always tell people lighthouse keeping wasn't as romantic as you think. And if you dig deep enough into the history of a lot of these offshore, more remote lighthouses, you're going to find at least one tragedy in there somewhere. The Coast Guard keepers were removed. The light was automated in 1976, and Egg Rock is now part of the Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge. So a lot of nesting gulls there. We do occasionally see a bald eagle or two on the island when we go by.
No.
I'm not sure who's speaking, but you should mute your microphone. I think it's Jeanette. If you could mute your microphone and until the Q&A period, if you have any questions. Thanks, I appreciate it. So this is Winter Harbor Lighthouse, the other lighthouse that's closest to Bar Harbor. We sometimes save this for last, and I actually took this picture late in the day, but sometimes it's the second lighthouse we see. And here's the map again, and the closer map, you see it's on the west side of the Schoodic Peninsula there at the entrance to Winter Harbor. After a congressional appropriation in 1854, the lighthouse was built on this little island called Mark Island. It's one of several Mark Islands in Maine, so that's why we usually call it Winter Harbor Light, not Mark Island Light. Went into service January 1st, 1857. Isn't that a beautiful photo? That is from 1859. It was the first photographic survey of American lighthouses, and they always had a lot of people in the photos to give it scale, and I just love those photos. It's from the National Archives. Even though it was about a mile offshore, access was sometimes difficult. The island was considered a pleasant family station, and in 76 years of service, only 9 keepers and their families lived on the island. It was always a single keeper and his family living there. This is Benjamin Maddox, who was there 1888 to 96. He's wearing the old Lighthouse Service uniform with the letter K on the lapel there for keeper. In August 1933, the light was discontinued, replaced by a lighted buoy. And soon after that, the property was sold at auction for $552. And 3 years later, this woman, Bernice Richmond, who was a writer and musician, and her husband, was Reginald Robinson, a sociologist, bought the island for $2,000. Richmond sailed a lot in Casco Bay in Maine as a girl and sometimes visited the keepers at Halfway Rock Lighthouse. She decided she wanted a lighthouse of her own. And during the time she and her husband spent at Winter Harbour Lighthouse, she wrote 2 books called Winter Harbour and Our Island Lighthouse. And they're really nice books. She was an excellent writer, very poetic in her writing. And I recommend you find them. You can find used copies online pretty easily. Other writers lived there after them. There are a number of writers who lived there over the years. The lighthouse is currently for sale for $2.3 million. So save your pennies. It's been for sale for a couple of years. And this is one of Mike Leonard's pictures of Winter Harbour Lighthouse. Mike, I don't know if you want to say anything about this lighthouse.
Just briefly, this I think is a morning shot because we're looking west here at the lighthouse, and this is the morning light on the lighthouse. So again, things that we look for when we do the photography cruises. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, and like I said, sometimes we see it in the morning, sometimes we see it near the end of the day. And either way, I think it's one of the most picturesque lighthouses on the Maine coast. Excuse me. This is Prospect Harbor Lighthouse, and this is another one of Mike's photos. And this is one of the oldest wooden lighthouses in the country. There are very few wooden lighthouses surviving from the 1800s. Did you want to say anything before I get into the history of this lighthouse, Mike, about the...
Why don't you just go right into it, Jeremy, and if people have got questions, I am checking the chat screen. Feel free to send me something that way.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, yeah, so here's a map showing its location on the east side of the Scudic Peninsula. It's in Prospect Harbor, which is a village of the town of Gouldsboro. And Prospect Harbor developed a substantial fishing fleet in the 1800s. They established the lighthouse in 1850, and here's what it looked like originally, a stone lighthouse and a stone dwelling. It was deactivated for a while between 1859 and 1870 because the harbor wasn't being used much, but traffic increased. It was reactivated in 1870. And the original granite lighthouse and keeper's house were replaced in 1891 by the present 38-foot wooden lighthouse and the 1.5-story farmhouse style keeper's house. Very attractive light station. And I took this picture during a visit in 2002. It's on a top secret Navy base and not too many people get on there. I was lucky enough to get on there a couple of times. And this is Albion Fockingham with his family. He was previously at Libby Island and Moose Peak lighthouses, which I'll be talking about. He was at Prospect Harbor in the 20s and 30s. Great picture of him in his lighthouse service uniform with his family. Before him, Ambrose Wasgett, the same guy who was the first keeper at Egg Rock, was keeper at Prospect Harbor starting in 1891. His 2 daughters later remembered playing croquet with visitors to the light station, as well as annual open houses that included boathouse dinners. Long tables would be set up in the boathouse with large quantities of food for the visitors. The light was automated in 1934. This is the modern acrylic light that's there. The light remains inactivated to navigation. The surrounding grounds and buildings belong to the Navy. And actually the Navy is now taking care of the lighthouse itself as well. The keeper's house is known as Gull Cottage. It is available for overnight stays for active and retired military families, and active Navy personnel get reservation priorities. This is inside the house. There's a lot of ghost stories about this lighthouse. One of the stories that's often told is that the statue of the sea captain, who's in the middle here, seems to change positions by itself. And some guests also claim to have seen and heard a ghost in the house at night. I can't verify any of this, but when I was there, I took part in a Travel Channel documentary on haunted lighthouses that's been shown many times. And if you've ever seen that, if you remember a scene where you see the mysterious shadow of the keeper going up the stairs in the Prospect Harbor Lighthouse, that's actually my shadow. And they put a uniform on me and had me go up the stairs. So I was the mysterious ghost in the lighthouse. So I'm going to move on. Oh, before I do, this is taken in 2004 when the lighthouse was being restored by the American Lighthouse Foundation. The lantern was removed by crane and restored separately, and the lantern deck was rebuilt. Windows were also replaced, and that solved a problem with water leaking into the tower. So left the tower in very good shape at that time. This is Petit Manan Lighthouse, the second tallest lighthouse in Maine at 119 feet tall, established in 1817 and rebuilt in 1855. And Petit Manan, as you can see, is a low, rocky island. Does have some grass, but it's largely rocky, about 14 miles from Bar Harbor. Whoop, let me show you the map where it's located. You see the Scudic Peninsula to the west there, and the nearest point of land is Petit Manan Point. Both the point and the island, Petit Manan, were named by the explorer Samuel de Champlain. Manan is from a local Indian word meaning island out to sea. The original lighthouse served to guide shipping traffic towards some of the local bays and harbors, and also to warn of a dangerous bar between the island and the mainland. The present 119-foot granite tower, as I said, is the second tallest lighthouse in Maine, second to Boone Island in the southern coast. And the new lighthouse, when it was built, was fitted with the second order Fresnel lens. And you can actually see the original lighthouse here in this picture, right here. The stubby little lighthouse was the original lighthouse next to the much taller new lighthouse. This is James Freeman, who was keeper in the 1930s with his two children. His daughter, Maisie, on the left there, grew up, spent much of her childhood on the island, and she later wrote about it for Down East magazine. She wrote, quote, "No trees grew in the shallow soil of Petit Manan, but there were patches of grass and a few hardy wildflowers grew in abundance, even among the rocks, sweet pea, buttercups, and others. We had a small cranberry bog yielding berries to can each year. We tried putting in a vegetable garden using seaweed for fertilizer, but we gave it up as hopeless. We also tried keeping a cow because fresh milk was a rarity. I shall never forget getting her there. You've never lived until you've shared a rowboat with a cow. When playing, we usually kept to the top part of the shore. None of us could swim. There was really no place to learn in the frigid Atlantic." And Petit Manan is one of the foggiest places on the Maine coast, with an average of about 70 foggy days a year. There was a fog bell and striking mechanism, later a steam fog whistle. And these are from a visit I made to the island in 2004 with the Coast Guard. It was so foggy that day, the Coast Guard crew on the buoy tender had trouble finding the island. You couldn't see the island at all. They had to follow the sound of the electronic foghorn to find the island. Petit Manan and the island itself have been turned over to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's now part of the Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge. The island supports a tern colony of common terns, Arctic terns, and roseate terns. There's also a breeding colony of Atlantic puffins and common eiders. And these are a couple more pictures from my visit, the stairs in the tower and one of the ruined buildings. The keeper's house still stands, but some of the other buildings are in ruins. Julie, would you like to add anything before I move on about the bird population of Petit Manan?
Yeah, so it's doing fairly stable. They usually have 5 interns, which are typically college students, out there for about 10 to 12 weeks, and they monitor the seabird colony. And during our tours out there, when we go on a daily basis, we get to chat with them, and they update us as to the status of the seabird colony. We were out there one day, and a peregrine falcon was attacking the colony and flew off with a fledgling in its talons, so that was pretty interesting. But we have Atlantic puffins, terns. I think they have roughly about 1,300 tern pairs out there. So that's another really wonderful part about this tour, is visiting this island and the seabirds that you get to see. So they have 2 techs out there, interns right now, that we talk with, and they seem to be doing fairly well out there.
Great. This is a beautiful picture taken by Mike Leonard here with an incredible sky. Mike, was this last year? It was pretty recent, I think.
I think this was, and I'm just answering in the chat right now. I used a wide-angle lens to get the wispy clouds that to me really spoke to me. It was a beautiful sky for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're going to talk more about puffins a little later with Machias Seal Island, but we usually see some puffins flying around and in the water here at Petit Manan. So moving on, this is Narraguagus or Pond Island Lighthouse. It is on Pond Island, but there's another Pond Island lighthouse to the south on the Kennebec River. So I prefer to refer to this is Narraguagus Light. Pond Island is a 360-acre island near Millbridge. You see the town of Millbridge just north of the lighthouse there on the Narraguagus River. The town of Millbridge was an important shipping point for lumber coming down that river, and shipbuilding and fishing was flourishing too. So they established the lighthouse in 1853. Here's an 1859 photo of how it looked originally, with a tower and lantern on the keeper's dwelling. And it went through a lot of changes over the years. I'm not going to detail all that. They changed it multiple times and ended up looking like this by the late 1800s, early 1900s. This light eventually was discontinued in 1934, and the lighthouse and other buildings and surrounding 5 acres were sold at auction to a man named Wilbur Dameron. The property was later inherited by his son, Wilbur Jr. Here's one of Mike's pictures from one of the recent cruises. And I just want to tell you quickly that this is one of many lighthouses that has a ghost story. Dig deep enough for just about any lighthouse, you're going to find a ghost story. In the 1970s, 2 college friends of a member of the Dameron family spent the night in a downstairs bedroom. They reported hearing a woman speaking loudly and angrily in a foreign language during the night. The only woman present in the house, Wilbur Dameron Jr.'s wife, Nancy, spoke only English and claimed she had been asleep all night. On the following night, one of the young men was aroused by a loud noise next to him, as if something heavy had landed on his pillow. There was nothing on the pillow and nothing in the room was disturbed. The spirit left the young men alone, they said, after they made it clear they were there to renovate the house, not to harm it. So again, that's in a book on the history of Pond Island. And again, dig deep enough for any lighthouse. You're most likely going to find at least one ghost story. Moving along to Nash Island, and it's just the square brick lighthouse stands on the island today. There's no other lighthouse buildings there, and it's no longer an active light. And here's a map showing its location. You see it's not too far from the previous lighthouse. You see Millbridge to the northwest there, and there's some other small towns to the north there. And the Pleasant River is north of the lighthouse. In the 1830s, dozens of vessels were built and launched on the Pleasant River, and there was a lot of export of lumber and granite and fish from that area. So they authorized the building of the lighthouse, and it was went into service in 1838. This is the original short rubble stone lighthouse. I believe it was shingled. If you look closely, you can see it looks shingled. And it was rebuilt in 1874. This is an early picture of the present lighthouse with the fog bell tower next to it. You can see the fog bell over here, 1,000-pound bell. Keeper would have to go in that tower and wind up a clockwork mechanism every couple of hours in times of fog, and a hammer would strike the bell every so many seconds in times of fog. John Purington, a Portland, Maine native, became keeper in 1916. He and his wife had 9 children. His daughter, Genevieve, otherwise known as Jenny, who you see here, was not quite 4 when she arrived at Nash Island. She started raising sheep when she was a girl and continued that for the rest of her life. After she quit school, she started lobster fishing full-time also. The light was automated in 1947, and shortly after that, the Coast Guard destroyed all the buildings except for the lighthouse. They destroyed the keeper's house, the fog signal building, the oil house, the boathouse. They actually burned down some of the buildings, including the keeper's house. And Jenny Cyrone watched that happen, and she later described how she felt. She said, "That's the only time I felt like hurting anybody in my life." I think somebody might have their microphone on. If you could make sure you've muted yourselves until we do the Q&A period at the end. Here's a more recent picture of Jenny Cyrone. She tended sheep and hauled lobster traps until she was well into her 80s. She died in 2004 at the age of 91, and it was her inspiration that led to the preservation of the lighthouse. It was discontinued in 1982, replaced by a buoy, and the Coast Guard was going to destroy the lighthouse, but it was saved. It remains standing, and Friends of Nash Island Light cares for it. I visited there in 2001, visited the island. You see Jenny's sheep on the island on the right there, and that's at her home on the left. She called the sheep her babies. There's a woman named Barbara Hananaya who's part of the Friends group, and I feel very lucky that I got to meet Jenny Cyrone. Again, she passed away at 91 a few years ago. This is Moose Peak Light, another down east, very rugged location. And it is on the map, on a closer map. You see it's pretty close to the town of Jonesport. It's on Mistake Island, which is about 4 miles south of Moosebec Reach, the body of water that goes through here. The name Moosebec and Mistake Island and Moose Peak all come from an Indian word that appears to have meant moose head. So that variations on that name appear around there. Here's an early photograph. The original 24-foot Robelstone Tower was built in 1826, rebuilt in 1851, the present brick lighthouse. This is a great picture that was emailed to me of survivors of a shipwreck that had gotten off of this shipwreck and were waiting to be picked up, I guess, by the lighthouse. From most of its history, the station had a keeper and an assistant. They both lived on the island with their families. Life was usually harmonious, but sometimes it wasn't so harmonious. Excuse me, in 1887, the local inspector wrote to the chairman of the Lighthouse Board that, quote, the wife of the principal keeper and his grown-up daughters used the vilest possible language, unquote, towards the assistant keeper and his family, visitors, and towards the principal keeper himself. As a result, the principal keeper and his family were soon removed and the assistant was promoted. During the period from 1918 to 34, Moose Peak Light Station logged more fog than anywhere else in Maine, 1,607 hours a year, more than 20% of the time. You see the fog signal building and the chickens out in front of it there. Keeper's chickens were apparently free-range chickens. So this station was auctioned under the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. Here's an aerial picture of it later on. I should mention the duplex house there you see there was built in 1903, linked to the lighthouse by a walkway. That house was destroyed in 1982 by a military team as a training exercise. I believe it was Green Berets, or maybe it was Navy SEALs, actually, in this case. I think it was Navy SEALs. The lighthouse more recently was auctioned to the public in 2012, along with 6 acres of land. And it was later sold to a young couple, Jeremy Richardson and Miriam Davidson. This is Jeremy. And they are gradually restoring the lighthouse. They just bought it a year or so ago. And I interviewed them in episode 47 of the podcast Lighthearted, so you might want to look that up. And they are working really hard. They love it out there. They've got a lot of work to do because the lighthouse is in pretty rough shape. This is Libby Island Light, another rugged location. Libby Island is at the entrance to Machias Bay. You see Machias Port, the town to the north there, and that's Machias Bay, directly north of the lighthouse. A stone tower was built at the south end of the island in 1822, along with the wood frame keeper's house. But the first lighthouse was so badly built, and it was they probably used salt water in the mortar, in the lime, which happened in a few places, and that's something you don't do. So the lighthouse was so badly built, it fell down after a few months, and they rebuilt the lighthouse in the following year, 1823. So the lighthouse that's there today was built in 1823. This is another one of the foggiest locations on the coast. There was a fog bell that later was replaced by a fog trumpet, and this is the fog signal building over on the right there. Hervey, that's Hervey, H-E-R-V-Y, not Harvey. Hervey Wass became keeper at Libby Island in 1919. His son Fillmore later wrote this book, Lighthouse in My Life, that I very highly recommend. It's a great book. During this period, when the Wass family lived on the island, there were as many as 20 people living on the island with the keeper and 2 assistants and their families. Many different games, including baseball, believe it or not, were played on the island. Whoop. And again, please be sure you've muted yourselves. Somebody is unmuted there. Everybody, if you can hear me, please make sure you mute yourselves. Thank you. So again, they played games including baseball. Another popular game on the island was Grass is Poison. In the game Grass is Poison, the children had to walk around the perimeter of the island without touching any grass. That necessitated a climb down a 50-foot cliff near the lighthouse, which of course they didn't tell their parents about. In the book also, Phil Wass described feelings of awe for the lighthouse inspector, Royal Luther, and young Phil sometimes confused the inspector with God. But they were both very powerful figures to the lighthouse families. The inspector would arrive unannounced on the lighthouse tender. The children would tag along as the inspector went around with the keeper and toward the station. But everything was always in perfect order because the whole family pitched in to make the place sparkle. And young Fillmore's job was to polish the brass in the keeper's house. This is Jasper Cheney, became an assistant under Wass in 1933. I interviewed his daughter, Ella, in 2003. She said, quote, "The men worked very hard on the island. Every building was kept in A1 shape always. Painting was an endless job, both inside and out. The foghorn and light were gone over every day to make sure they were in perfect order. It's odd, but when the foghorn was running at night and stopped because it ran out of fuel, all three keepers would awaken and be there in a matter of minutes," unquote. This island, like some of the others I've mentioned, is now part of the Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge, but the light is still active. The light itself is maintained by the Coast Guard. This is Little River Light in Cutler, a really pretty place with pristine woods on the island and on the mainland. I think it's one of the prettiest lighthouses in New England. And Cutler is a town of about 800 people with a protected harbor. And the lighthouse is on Little River Island at the entrance to Cutler Harbor. And you can see they call it Little River, but it's not really a river. It's just a long, narrow harbor, Cutler Harbor there. As trade and shipbuilding and the fishing industry were growing, the lighthouse was established in 1847. It looks a lot like the original Prospect Harbor lighthouse with a stone tower and a stone dwelling. This is from 1859, this picture here. It was rebuilt in 1876 as a cast iron tower, similar to a lot of lighthouses built at that time, including Nubble Lighthouse in York. I know a lot of you know that one. It's a 41-foot cast iron tower. The keeper's house was also rebuilt at that time in 1876. And you see the fog bell tower on this picture that was there for a long time, but is no longer there. Willie Corbett was keeper 1921 to 1939. The Corbett family, I believe there were 8 kids, kept a cow, pigs, and chickens on the island. Keeper Corbett was an excellent fiddler. He sometimes left on Saturday nights to play at dances at a nearby life-saving station. And his son, Neil Corbett, helped wind the clockwork mechanisms for the light and fog bell. And this is Neil Corbett on the left here. He was a World War II veteran and inductee in the Maine Baseball Hall of Fame. I feel very lucky to have met him. Great guy. He died in January 2008. And I'm sure a lot of you here recognize the other man in this picture. That is the late Ken Black, who is known as Mr. Lighthouse. Ken was a retired Coast Guard officer in Boston Harbor and Rockland, Maine, Lubec, Maine, and other places. And he started the collection of lenses and other artifacts at the Shore Village Museum in Rockland that eventually grew into the Maine Lighthouse Museum in Rockland. And just a really important figure in American lighthouse preservation, and a great guy, as I'm sure many of you know. I'm sure there's people here who knew him personally. So this is from a meeting between the two of them in 2002 when I was there to visit the lighthouse. Today, the lighthouse Little River is owned by the American Lighthouse Foundation. It is open, the keeper's house is open for overnight stays. And for the last few years, the caretaker, the summer caretaker on the island has been Terry Roden. He was a Coast Guard keeper in his younger days. So he's had basically two periods of his life spent at this lighthouse. He was a Coast Guard keeper when he was young, and he's been back as the caretaker in recent years. Great guy, loves that place so much, and he's been really good to it. I interviewed him for one of the episodes of the podcast, Lighthearted also, so you might want to look that up. He was a lot of fun to interview. So here's West Quoddy Headlight. I know it's one that a lot of you have visited. This is one of the iconic lighthouses in the United States at the easternmost point of the United States mainland. And here's the map showing its location right near the Canadian border, with Campobello Island to the north and Grand Manan Island out to the east. Again, the easternmost point of the US mainland. It's the earliest picture I know of from 1859. In 1808, when the light was established, it was the first American lighthouse east of Penobscot Bay. Early on, it had a fog cannon to warn mariners away from dangerous sail rocks, the rock formation offshore. And they had one of the nation's first fog bells in 1820. It was rebuilt in 1831, the lighthouse tower, and then again in 1857. And this picture was taken not long after it was rebuilt, and the red and white stripes were added around that time. Very iconic red and white stripes. The red stripes are, a lot of Canadian lights I've read on them. This is one of the few American ones that does, but apparently to make it stand out better against the snow in the winter. It was given a third order Fresnel lens in 1857. That lens is still in use today. I'm not going to get deeply into Fresnel lenses. A lot of you know what they are. Fresnel, invented in France and used in lighthouses all over the world, made of multiple prisms. This is one of 8 classical lenses still in use in the state of Maine, the only third order one. It doesn't look that huge in this picture, but it's around something like 8 feet tall. No, it's not that tall. It's a third order lens. It's more like 5 or 6 feet tall. I forget the exact height, but it's a beautiful, beautiful lens and kept in excellent shape. And again, still an active light, electric light inside that lens. This is Ephraim Johnson, keeper with his wife. He was from northern Maine, became an assistant at West Quoddy in 1900, advanced to principal keeper in 1905, and the family was well loved. They were known for their religious devotion. On Sundays, they'd gather around the pump organ with Ephraim's deep voice leading the sing-alongs. His granddaughter, Gwen Wasson, recalled some details of life there for an article by Ron Pesha for Lighthouse Digest. And she said, quote, "He felt like a very rich man. He loved it there on the ocean, doing what he wanted to do with his family around him. And he never lacked for food. Grandmother kept chickens and sometimes raised pigs," unquote. Bob Gray was keeper from 1934 to 1952. He was the last civilian keeper. Coast Guard took over from the old civilian lighthouse service in 1939. And Bob Gray joined the Coast Guard, so he was the last civilian keeper and the first Coast Guard keeper. His image was immortalized in the September 22nd, 1945 cover illustration of the Saturday Evening Post. This painting by Stephen Dohanos portrayed the keeper tending the lawn near the base of the lighthouse, as you can see. And it was said that Keeper Gray kept the lighthouse and fog signal building so clean you could eat off the floor. Always had a welcoming smile for visitors, and he was happy to give impromptu tours, often invited visitors in for a cup of tea. And this is a video clip. Whoops. Oh, well, that didn't work. Well, it was only about 5 or 10 seconds long of Keeper Gray coming up into the lantern room. That's interesting. Somehow, this is a Keynote, which is a Mac version of PowerPoint, and I've seen that audio clips in PowerPoint and Keynote don't seem to play in Zoom, and I think that's true of video clips as well. But anyway, that was a quick video clip of Howard Gray coming up into the lantern room. The lighthouse grounds are now part of Quoddy Head State Park. In 1998, under the Maine Lights Program, it became property of the state of Maine, and the West Quoddy Head Lightkeepers Association maintains an interpretive center in the Keeper's House, as you can see here, and they do a great job. And this is just one of the must-visit lighthouses in New England. It's a little off the beaten track for most people, but well worth the drive. This is Lubec Channel Light. And in the late 1800s, I should say, Lubec was an important trade and fishing port, and it became a center of the sardine industry. It was home to 20 packing plants. The channel known as Lubec Narrows, or the Lubec Channel between Lubec and Campobello Island, was dredged in the early 1880s, and they decided a lighthouse was needed in the channel to help guide vessels through there. So it was funded, and the lighthouse was completed in 1890. The foundation cylinder, the cast iron foundation cylinder, was sunk to a depth of 6 feet and leveled and filled with concrete. The tower contained 5 levels, including 2 levels of living quarters for keepers. It was always males only, so-called stag stations staffed by 2 male keepers. The first male keeper was Frederick Maran from a famous Maine lighthouse family. The assistant was Loring Myers, and that's Loring Myers in this picture in his lighthouse service uniform. Before he became a lighthouse keeper, Myers had lost his first wife and 3 children to illness. He moonlighted as an entrepreneur and inventor, and he dabbled in real estate and owned a sardine packing plant. For a while, his second wife, Abby, served as an assistant. She was the only woman keeper in this lighthouse's history. Elson Small, here with his wife, Connie. He went on to a 28-year career at lighthouses. He was the assistant at Lubec Channel starting in 1920. And then he married Loring Myers' niece, Connie, who you see here. When she was 19, Connie went to visit the lighthouse for the first time, and she was intimidated by the idea of climbing the 30-foot ladder. And she wrote the book, The Lighthouse Keeper's Wife, when she was 85, and she wrote, quote, "I was afraid of heights, but trying not to show just how scared I was, I said to Elson, I can never climb up there. He said, oh, yes, you can. Just grab the rungs and I'll be right behind you. So with him behind me, telling me to look up and never down, I made it. To this day, I have kept his words with me, and when I get discouraged, I would think of them. They've helped me many times to overcome a panicky feeling and to do what had to be done," unquote. And I was lucky enough to know Connie Small. She lived to be 103, and it was just an amazing, inspirational person. Here's a picture by Mike Leonard. Good, close, crisp shot. You can see the caisson is pretty rusty. I don't know, might be from last year. The lighthouse, the whole lighthouse is pretty rusty at this point. Keeper Nathaniel Alley was alone on duty here in 1934 in March when he was overcome by fumes from the coal stove, and he soon died from that. The light was automated shortly after that with a acetylene gas operation. In 1989, the light was due to be discontinued, but local residents mounted a Save the Spark Plug campaign. This type of lighthouse is often called a spark plug light. It was renovated in 92. It's got a 6-degree tilt, but it's considered stable. It was sold at auction in 2007 for $46,000, but I don't believe the private owner has done anything with it so far. And now we're in Canada. And the last few lighthouses I'm going to talk about are in Canada. And this one is actually south of the last few lighthouses I've talked about, Machias, Seal Island. You see it's south of Cutler there, and here's a closer map. Machias, Seal Island is between the Gulf of Maine and the Bay of Fundy, 10 miles southeast of Cutler, Maine, 12 miles southwest of Grand Manan Island, New Brunswick. The sovereignty. Okay, somebody's unmuted themselves. Please make sure you're muted. I thought I heard somebody say Machias. It is pronounced Machias, by the way. But anyway, make sure you're muted. The sovereignty is disputed between the U.S. and Canada. And here's an early picture. It was a 2-light station for quite a long time. The station was established in 1832 to help mariners to the ports of St. John and St. Andrews. 2 octagonal wooden towers were established, the keeper's dwelling also. And there were 2 lights to differentiate it from the single lights at Head Harbour and Campobello Island and Gannet Rock on Grand Manan. A fog cannon was installed in 1841, and then a steam fog whistle, the most powerful anywhere in the Bay of Fundy area, was established in 1873. And they had this is the fog signal building, they had a railway track linking the coal shed and fog alarm building with the landing area, and the railway car could carry 3 tons of coal at a time. But in heavy storms, the seas would wash right over the island and damage that railway a number of times. The present octagonal reinforced lighthouse was built in 1915 when the station went to a single light. It's a style that was popular in the early 1900s, similar to Peggy's Cove Light, Nova Scotia, and I know a lot of you know that one, very iconic. In 1944, the government of Canada declared Machias Seal Island a bird sanctuary. The island is home to the largest nesting colony of Atlantic puffins on the coast south of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And here is a photo by Mike Leonard of a puffin in the water, and one of a beautiful shot of a flying puffin. That is a great shot. Mike, I don't know if you want to say anything about photographing puffins here.
There's, if you're into wanting to photograph the puffins, I can mention over in the chat a place out of Cutler where they actually take people out to the island. It's one of the more impressive birds to see off the coast of Maine.
Absolutely.
You know, one other quick note I should mention about some of these lighthouses you've been talking about. You know, they're only visible by boat. You can't see these from the mainland, and there's a key reason why you might want to consider joining one of these cruises in the future.
That's a real good point. Yeah, a lot of these, you really have to get out in a boat to see them. And I was also going to mention Bold Coast Cruises out of Cutler, run by Andy Patterson. I did one of his cruises almost 20 years ago. I took these pictures. You get to go in bird blinds when you're out there, so you get really close to the puffins, which of course is a real treat. I was in Scotland with Skip Sherwood 3 years ago, and we went to Isle of May, where there were I believe it was close to 100,000 nesting puffins, so that was pretty incredible too, but that's another story. But I highly recommend the Bold Coast Cruises, Andy Patterson's cruises out of Cutler. Very, very highly recommended. This is Barna Norton, who brought thousands of people for years to Machias Seal Island on puffin trips from Jonesport. He claimed he owned the island. He said it belonged to his ancestor, Tall Barney Beale, and he said that Beale willed it to his first male descendant to be named for him, and that was Barna Norton. And so Barna would go out every year and plant the American flag, but the light station remains the only Canadian lighthouse with resident keepers in New Brunswick, and Canada considers the property to be wholly owned by the Canadian government. So to some degree, the dispute continues over whose island it is, but for all intents and purposes, it's a Canadian island. This is Mulholland Point Light on Campobello. This wooden lighthouse was established in 1885 on the west side of Campobello Island, just barely over the border in Canada, to guide freighters and other vessels. Here's an early postcard through Lubec Narrows. You see a passenger steamer going through in this postcard. It stands today in a landscaped park about 300 feet from the border with the United States. This is Angus Newman, the last keeper, became keeper in 1926. He would walk 3 miles from his home to the lighthouse before dawn to extinguish the light. He would then row back across to Lubec to work a daily 8-hour shift at a smoke shed. Then he would row back across the Narrows to light the light before dark, and then walk back to his home. When the roads are impassable in winter, he'd walk along the shore, which was longer. He walked the equivalent of more than 3 times the distance around the Earth's equator during his years as keeper. He retired at the age of 70 after 37 years as keeper. The FDR summer home is on Campobello Island, the Roosevelt summer home, which you can visit. It's a wonderful place to visit. A few weeks before her passing, in 1962, Eleanor Roosevelt made her last trip to Campobello to attend the dedication of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial Bridge, linking the island to the mainland. The navigational lights on the bridge made the Mulholland Lighthouse obsolete. It was decommissioned in 1963. The lighthouse tower and adjacent shed were sold into private ownership after the light was discontinued, and it was then later donated to Roosevelt Campobello International Park. This is another one of the most iconic lighthouses in Canada and in that whole region. Head Harbour Light, also known as East Quoddy Head Light, because it's kind of opposite West Quoddy Head Light, but it is officially Head Harbour Light. It's got that very distinctive red cross. There's no other lighthouse that looks quite like that. And this is the oldest wooden lighthouse in the world. And here is the map showing it at the northern tip of Campobello Island. There are about 90 lighthouses in New Brunswick. The first one in New Brunswick is at St. John Harbour in 1791, but that one doesn't exist anymore. This was the second to be built, but it's now the oldest standing lighthouse in New Brunswick, and built in 1829, makes it the oldest wooden lighthouse in North America. And it's accessible only at low tide by land. It's on a small island or islet, and you, again, you can only walk out to it at low tide. The first keeper was John Snell from England, and his daughter Mary lost her sight due to illness at the age of 7, and she published this book, which is available, about her life in 1881, and it's a really interesting book. You can buy it online, or you can buy it from the group that takes care of the lighthouse. I'll read you just a little bit of what she wrote. She wrote, quote, "At times when in a listless mood, if the weather was pleasant, I would go out of doors and sit down in some spot where I could listen to any sound there might be to listen to. That which pleased and interested me the most was the singing of the sailors while getting their vessels underway, preparatory to leaving the harbor, to the entrance of which the lighthouse is a faithful guide to the mariner by night in all seasons of the year. When a dozen or more sailors unite in singing, as they usually do when weighing anchor, their concert is well worth hearing." This lighthouse was staffed by Canadian Coast Guard until 1986. It is now a classified heritage site. The Friends of Head Harbour Light Station was formed in 2000 to preserve, protect, and promote the unique heritage of this lighthouse for the enjoyment and education of all. And over the years, I've looked at it many times, and it's really pretty from the water. And again, to walk out there, you got to walk out at low tide. I've only walked out to it twice, and one of those times was last year. I had a guest from Australia, and the two of us walked out to it at low tide. You better time it right, or you're going to get trapped out there when the tide comes in. And during the summer, they have high school students giving tours out there, and it's just it's beautiful. This is a couple of shots from the interior of the house. And if you have a chance to get out, it's a little strenuous. You got to go up and down a series of stairs and ladders to get out there, so it's not for everybody. You got to walk over wet rocks and so forth, and part of it. And here's the active light, a drum style Fresnel lens still in place, still an active light. And the Friends of Head Harbour Light Station just do a tremendous job out there. And the last 3 lighthouses I'm going to talk about are near Grand Manan, on or near Grand Manan Island. Just want to say a few words about the island. It's the largest island in the Bay of Fundy. It's 21 miles from north to south and 53 square miles. It's reached by ferry from Black's Harbour, New Brunswick. There's also a small airport on the island. And it's part of New Brunswick, but the closest point on the mainland is Lubec, Maine. By 1884, Grand Manan became the largest supplier of smoked herring in the world. By 1920, it produced 1 million boxes, or 20,000 tons of smoked herring, all caught in local waters. In the late 1800s, it became a tourist destination and popular for artists. And today the population is about 2,300. This is Long Eddy Point Light at the northern end of Grand Manan. It was established originally as a fog signal station in 1874. A light was added in 1966, but local people still know it as the whistle, after the fog whistle. Originally was a steam-operated whistle, 80 feet above the water, emitted 3 blasts every minute. The fog signal building was below the top of the cliff, and it was connected via a chute, and I think you can actually see the chute a little bit in the upper left of this picture. An 80-foot long chute. Again, Charles, I think you need to mute your Charles. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. The coal was dumped into the chute to be delivered for the fog signal. And in 1893, in 1 year, 125 tons of coal were used for the fog whistle. The station was automated, and the last keeper, Barry Bagley, was removed in 1989. Bagley said that the sunsets seen from the point were magnificent when you could see them. Thick fog was a way of life, and if the light or fog signal malfunctioned, he said you just prayed that no vessels came up on shore. This photo is by our good friend Chris Mills. I don't think Chris is, I'm sorry that he couldn't be with us today. I was hoping he might be able to join us, but he usually co-narrates these Grand Slam cruises along with my other good friend, Bob Trapani Jr., director of the American Lighthouse Foundation. So Chris took this picture. He's a former lightkeeper himself. And I don't think this is Barry Bagley, the keeper from Long Eddy, but I'm not sure. It might be. I wish Chris was here to tell us. The lighthouse itself is not open to the public, but the grounds are open year-round. Here's another picture by Chris Mills. And it's a popular place to watch seals and whales, porpoises, and bald eagles, and other wildlife. This is Swallowtail Light, really pretty wooden lighthouse, another one of the oldest wooden lighthouses. And it's at the little bit below the northern tip, the northeastern tip of Grand Manan. Calls for a lighthouse here intensified after an 1857 shipwreck, the Lord Ashburton, in which 21 died. Here's an early engraving of this lighthouse. And they picked the peninsula known as the Swallowtail for the lighthouse. It juts out at the northeast end of the island. And it's a 45-foot wooden octagonal lighthouse, went into service in July 1860. Grimmer Ingersoll, previously at Machias Seal Island, was a keeper here from 1960 to 85. And his son and daughter later recalled life for an article in Lighthouse Digest. His son, Marl, said that annual visits of the supply ship are exciting. The children would eagerly open the boxes that arrived. Some of them contained paint for the buildings. Marl Ingersoll described a memorable visit of the supply ship when the wooden derrick used for hoisting supplies collapsed with a huge crash, and luckily nobody was hurt. Grimmer Ingersoll left Swallowtail as its last keeper. The light was automated in 1985. And then for some years following its 1996 renovation, the Keeper's House was operated as a bed and breakfast, and a group called the Swallowtail Keepers Society was formed. The group has a long-term lease with the village of Grand Manan to care for the site, while the lighthouse tower itself is still owned by the Canadian government. This is Southwest Headlight, and it's not the most spectacular lighthouse, but it's a very spectacular location. A lighthouse was needed at the southwest point of Grand Manan to guide shipping approaching from the south and to assist mariners in the North Channel of the Bay of Fundy. The station was established in February of 1880, and originally a square pyramidal wooden tower that you see here attached to the dwelling, and then rebuilt in 1959. And here you see the old and new lighthouses next to each other when it was rebuilt. And I want to tell you about an amazing rescue that happened here on February 26, 1963. Keeper Ottawa Benson and his wife were awakened by a knock on the door. A man at the door was covered in snow. He said he had just climbed up the cliff, but his brother was still at the bottom. Their motorboat had been caught in a storm, was wrecked at the base of the cliff. Keeper Benson got together a rescue party of 17 men. They knew that Floyd Jones, the man at the bottom of the cliff, wouldn't survive the night. It was frigid cold. A man named Vernon Bagley was lowered by rope down the side of the cliff, and he found Jones unconscious, found him frozen in ice, his clothes frozen in ice at the bottom. He wasn't unconscious yet, actually, but he found his clothes frozen in ice. He carried Jones as he was pulled back up on the rope, but Jones fell unconscious on the way up. And for a while, Bagley couldn't carry him anymore, so he wedged him into the rocks. Bagley was pulled to the top. He collapsed in the snow. Assistant lightkeeper Sid Guptill was then lowered down and brought Jones the rest of the way back up to the top of the cliff. The Jones brothers both recovered. A crowd of 300 gathered at the local high school to see Bagley get a Carnegie Silver Medal for heroism, and Sid Guptill, the assistant keeper, got a bronze medal. When asked why he did what he did, Bagley said, quote, "When you get right down to it, we're all supposed to be brothers," unquote. The lighthouse was automated and de-staffed in 1987. And this is the last lighthouse I'm talking about. 8 miles south of Grand Manan, Gannet Rock, one of a group of rocks and ledges on the west side of the entrance of the Bay of Fundy. Here's a map. Again, 8 miles south of Grand Manan. Bill was passed for the lighthouse in 1824, but it took a while to decide on the best location, and it wasn't built until 1831. Originally, it was an octagonal wooden tower, shorter than it is now. It was originally 41 feet tall. The second keeper, E.G. Miller, drowned in 1837 when he was rowing back from another island where the keepers went to get their water supply. The tower was greatly modified in 1905. The height was increased to 90 feet. And it was given a second order Fresnel lens at that time. And then a new keeper's house was built in 1906 and a new fog signal building shortly after that. Interestingly, a German U-boat captured the crew of a schooner near Gannet Rock in 1918 and burned the schooner, and they put the crew of the schooner adrift, and the crew managed to land at Gannet Rock, and the keeper took them in. A new lantern was installed in the lighthouse in 1967. The second order Fresnel lens is now on display at the Petit Manan Museum. The light was decommissioned in 2002. It's been abandoned since then. It was listed by Heritage Canada as one of the top 10 endangered places in Canada. Chris Mills, again, our good friend, co-narrator of a lot of the Grand Slam cruises, who lives in Nova Scotia today. He was a keeper at a number of Canadian lights on both coasts, and he lived and worked at Gannet Rock Lighthouse from 1991 to 93. He took the picture on the left when he was a keeper in the early 90s, and he took the picture on the right when he returned last year in 2019. And I don't think I need to comment anymore on that. I think the pictures speak for themselves. Again, the lighthouse was abandoned after it was decommissioned in 2002. And these pictures speak for themselves too. I don't think Chris looks any different. I think if anything, he looks better. There he is in the early 90s and last year, but the lighthouse hasn't aged too well. Chris wrote about his experience at Gannet Rock in his book, Vanishing Lights. It's a great book. Also talked with me about it in an interview from my podcast, Lighthearted, episode 23. In an article after his return, he said, quote, "You can walk around Gannet Rock in about 40 seconds. You can spit from end to end or side to side pretty well if you're a good spitter. For me, it just distilled everything the light keeping was into one tiny little package. The sea, the smell of the diesel from the generators, the light, the horn," unquote. When he worked there, Chris would wake up early to gather weather information and send it to the Canadian Coast Guard. He'd check the light and engines in the tower. He said a lot of time went into maintaining the exterior of the lighthouse. In a CBC, Canadian Broadcast Company article, he described his 2019 visit. He said it was bittersweet. He said, quote, "It was such an eye-opener to see how the tower is still standing proud, although it doesn't look great. It has such good bones, and it's something that could still be stabilized and saved, and it's really painful to see it in the shape it's in now. It was like a ruined fortress above us. It was amazing to wander through that abandoned tower full of ghosts." And here is one of Mike Leonard's pictures. So even though it's a very sad sight, the lighthouse is in such rough shape today, it's, to me, also just magnificent. It's an incredible lighthouse. You can understand why no nonprofit wants to take this lighthouse on. It would be extremely expensive for any, whether it's a government or a nonprofit, to maintain this tower today, and that's why it's basically demolition through neglect. So I hate to end on a sad note in a way, but also a high note as far as just an incredible offshore lighthouse, Gannet Rock. And this is one of Mike's photos, and I don't know if Mike wants to comment on this this lighthouse at all.
It was sad to see this, and to hear Chris talk about it so passionately on one of the most recent trips was really heart-wrenching. When I shot this, I was sort of thinking this might be the last time I see this lighthouse, which is really unfortunate because it really is a beautiful lighthouse. But as you say, the amount to keep this alive is prohibitive, and unless somebody wins the lottery, I don't think that's you may not see this lighthouse again, which is really unfortunate.
Right. Unfortunately, I wish we could save them all, but realistically, I'm not sure that's possible. So hopefully we'll see this lighthouse again next year. And again, it'll be sad, but amazing at the same time. So I'm going to get out of screen sharing at this point. If Whoops. Oh, no. Before I do, I wanted to show a couple of nature pictures by Mike taken on these cruises. There's, I believe, a minke whale, Mike. And I can go back to that, but I also want to show this flying bald eagle that you took. And I don't know if you want to say a little bit about just nature photography on these cruises in general.
Yeah, it's incidental, and to see whales is always wonderful. We are in whale territory often on this particular cruise, so it makes sense to be ready to capture pictures of whales, and we do see some eagles and osprey, and it again is a bonus because we're here obviously for the lighthouses, but it's always nice to see some of the nature as well.
Mm-hmm. That is a wonderful picture of that flying bald eagle, which I think, Mike, you said was possibly near Winter Harbor Lighthouse.
If I remember right, that's where I think it flew out of. Yes.
Yeah, we've seen them around there quite a bit. So I'm going to get out of screen sharing at this point, and at least I'm trying to.
You are.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Okay, and I'm back to seeing everybody, all your smiling faces there, and I hope I didn't put everybody to sleep. I hope I didn't speak too long, but we're gonna we can do some Q&A at this point. Actually, when people registered for this event, you got a message saying any questions, ask Jeremy D'Entremont. And I think that what that meant was if you have any questions about registering for the event, but that was a little ambiguous. So some people took that to mean if you wanted to submit questions about the lighthouses in advance to do that. And so a couple of people did. So I just want to mention Bill Bates, who's here somewhere, submitted some questions. And mostly they're really hard questions that I can't really answer because he asked about the where some of the Fresnel lenses, and actually most of the lighthouses are not ones that I talked about, but where some of the Fresnel lenses went. And I'll just say for the most part, most Fresnel lenses that removed from lighthouses, the so-called classical Fresnel lenses, most of them have been lost. Back in the days where people didn't realize their historic value and their monetary value, some of them are tossed into the ocean. Some of them became bases for coffee tables and people's homes and so forth. So a lot of them are lost. We don't know where a lot of them went. Fortunately, a lot of them were saved. So Bill, your question about where did a lot of these lenses go? If I don't say on my website and in my books where the lenses are, that means I don't know where they are. You also asked about Burnt Coat Harbor Light, whether the fog signal building is brick, but there's a fog bell tower there, which is wooden. So the answer would be wood. And you asked about what is the Blue Hill Bay Light, which we see in some of the mid-coast crews. What is the foundation material? And I believe it's a brick foundation. So, and Jessica Seekins asked how many lighthouses are still active today. I think I said that on my introduction. There's about 850 standing lighthouses in this country, and approximately half, I can't give an exact number, but approximately half are still active aids to navigation. So, Julie, did you want to say anything at this point? We can open things up for questions, and we're gonna ask people to digitally raise their hands if they want to, or they can ask in the chat. Do we have any questions waiting in the chat?
I don't see any right now, but yeah, again, feel free to. Thank you, Jeremy. That was amazing, as always.
Thank you. You're very welcome. I do see somebody asked, was this recorded so we can watch it again? Yes, it is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube on both the Bar Harbor Whale Watch, right, Julie, on the Bar Harbor Whale Watch YouTube channel, yep, and on the U.S. Lighthouse Society YouTube channel. So it'll be posted within a few days on both of those. I see we do have a hand raised in the by R.R. Geiger. And just for people who don't know, if you're not Zoom savvy, if you click on participants down the bottom, you should be able to, and somebody else help me because again, my host controls are different and I always forget exactly what this looks like. But if you click on participants, an option should show, I believe over on the right for raising your hand. And when you select that, we see that your hand is raised and you go to the top of the list, and we'll select you and have you unmute your microphone so you can ask your question. Does that make sense to people? I don't know if you're all seeing that. Okay, so R.R. Geiger, you're on if you have a question. Looks like you've already unmuted yourself.
Yeah, you mentioned whale watching. Were there more pictures on the whale watching?
Julie, this was specifically about this, you know, the lighthouses, and in lieu of the lighthouse cruise that was canceled. But Julie, if you want to talk about, I think there's pictures on the website, maybe on stuff on YouTube and various places where people can look at pictures of whales. Julie, you want to take that?
Yeah, if you can check out our Facebook page. We also have photos on our website. If you go to our recent sightings on our homepage, that can show you some of what we've seen last year. We still need to upload photos there, but there are more recent photos on our Facebook page and Instagram page. I think, Mike, you might have pictures from the humpbacks we saw last year on the cruise between, I think it was around Petit Manan. I think that's where we saw them, which is very common place they tend to hang out when we're up there.
Yeah, we do see some on the way, which is kind of fun. And like I say, it's a bonus to see nature. And I'm always prepared to see whales whenever I'm on a boat. So yeah, there are some questions I see over in the chat. I don't know if I want to, should we go to those now?
Sure, we can kind of go back and forth. I see, when might this be offered again? We don't have any specific plans, although now the other cruises have been canceled, right, Julie, for this year?
Yeah, unfortunately,
the all day cruises.
This year, but this tour will be offered again July 24th in 2021.
Yeah.
And you can currently book it now if you want.
Yeah, and as far as the online presentation, I'm not sure we're going to do this for the other cruises. It's kind of, so it's very, very time consuming to prepare this. And I'm happy to do it, but we'll have to, I'm not sure if we're going to do anything.
Jeremy, and Ann Pupa asked the question, do you know why Little River Light was rebuilt from the original stone? That looked pretty substantial.
That's a good question. It looks substantial, but it was built in, was it 1847? And I would say that most of our lighthouse construction before the 1850s was pretty bad. So it probably, I believe from inspection reports, it wasn't built very well. Probably had problems with leaks and so forth. So and cast iron lighthouses became so popular in the 1870s. It just seemed like, I guess, the way to go at that point. So I'd have to look back specifically to see what the inspection reports were saying. But again, most of our American lighthouses before the new Lighthouse Board was formed, and Ann, I know Ann, and she knows a lot of this history. There's Ann. I see you. Before 1852, the Lighthouse Board, a lot of the lighthouses were pretty shoddily built. But you're right, it did certainly look pretty substantial. But that's the best.
There's also a question from a Maryland Turk. Thanking you and also saying, can any military retired stay at Prospect Harbor, or is it just Navy?
I know Maryland too. Hi, Maryland, wherever you are. The answer to that is, yeah, any military can stay there. Active Navy personnel get priority bookings, but any retired military can stay there.
Sarah Chase asked the question, you mentioned fog cannons and I think a fog trumpet. What's the difference between those and fog bells? Yeah.
The earliest fog signals in North America were cannons. There was a cannon at Boston Light. It was literally a cannon. They wouldn't shoot like a cannonball, but they would fire powder, so there'd be a big bang, and mariners offshore in the fog who couldn't see anything, at least they'd hear they would blast the cannon first. They would, a lot of these vessels had small cannons on them, some kind of a gun that they would fire. The keeper would hear that, and they would fire the cannon at the light station in response, and the mariner would hear that, and it would, to some degree, it would help them tell where they were. It was better than nothing. The sound would help them kind of orient themselves. Later, fog bells came along. 1820 at West Quoddy was one of the first fog bells anywhere. But so those were largely large. They were large bronze bells, usually around 1,000 pounds. Some of them were bigger, and they were usually on these fog bell towers where they had clockwork mechanisms that had to be wound periodically by the keepers, and a hammer would strike the bell automatically every so many seconds. They were finicky. The machinery could break down a lot. And also the bells often couldn't be heard over the surf that well. So in a lot of these locations, they went to steam operated foghorns that were much louder, various types of horns and whistles that were super loud, that were for many years operated on steam. Later, compressed air kind of took over. But for many years, keepers had to shovel coal into boilers to run those steam operated foghorns. One of the I don't know if anybody's seen the recent movie, The Lighthouse, which I know it's controversial. Some people hate it. I actually liked it, but there's a lot of neat period detail in that, including you see the keeper played by Robert Pattinson shoveling coal into the boiler for the foghorn, which I've never seen in a movie before, which was kind of neat.
Jeremy, I see some people that look like they're physically waving their hands, thinking that they may not know to go click on raise their hands in the button. But there was one other question here about from Kristen M about double lighthouses, and also is there any tours in Lower Maine? I'm guessing in Southern Maine that you could take to see the lighthouses down there.
I'll ask the second question. Answer the second question first. Yeah. There's a lot of lighthouse cruises around, but this year there's hardly any because of the pandemic. So most of those, like I'm here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and we have a group here, Friends of Portsmouth Harbour Lighthouses, and we normally do a couple of sunset cruises in June, lighthouse cruises, and we wanted to do a cruise with you, Mike, this August, a photography cruise, but we're not doing that. And we usually do a 5-hour daytime cruise to 5 lighthouses in September, but we're not doing that this year. So a lot of these things are canceled for this year. There's the Maine Maritime Museum in Bath runs some lighthouse cruises. There's a lot of lighthouse cruises. I mean, if you the U.S. Lighthouse Society actually has a list of cruises, right, Jeff? And my own website, newenglandlighthouses.net, lists cruises as well. So there's too many for me to mention right now. But again, this is not a good year for these things.
And there is, I was just going to mention, the only one that I know of is actually the one that I'm going to be doing, which is September 12th. So, and I put that information up earlier. So if anybody would like to know more about that, send me a quick chat and I can send you the information on that.
So Julie, I know Bar Harbor Whale Watch is running some whale watches, right? But are you running the daily lighthouse cruise at this point, or what's happening with that?
So we are doing a 9:30 Puffin and Lighthouse cruise. So we go out to Egg Rock, Petit Manan, and Winter Harbor Light. And then once the Puffins leave, which is about mid-August, we'll start our Somme Sound Lighthouse cruise, where we'll visit Egg Rock, Bear Island, Bass Harbor, Baker Island, and Winter Harbor, and possibly Great Duck if the weather allows it. Sometimes it gets a little rough in the fall, but we give it a shot if we can.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremy, there's another question from the chat.
Okay. Oh yeah, there was I'm sorry, Mike, to back up, I think there was a two-part question before.
Oh, yes, yes.
Double lighthouses or
double
twin light stations. I didn't see the question, but was the question why were there some?
Yes, it was. I'm sorry, whoever it was who asked that question. I can't find the question here in the chat, but the question was, why were there two lights in some places and not in others?
Yeah, it was just to differentiate them from single lights nearby, because early in our lighthouse history, there wasn't great technology for making different flashes and that kind of thing to make it easy for mariners to differentiate one light station from another. So in some cases, they put two lights instead of one. On the east coast of the U.S., there were 7 two-light or twin-light stations. Thatcher Island off Rockport, Mass, off Cape Ann is a very famous one. Baker's Island off Salem, Mass was another one, et cetera, Plymouth, Mass. So that's why there were two lights at Machias Seal Island to differentiate it from a couple of the single lights nearby.
There's another question from Coran Thompson. She's asking, what's the oldest lighthouse in Maine?
Portland Head. Portland Head Light in Cape Elizabeth, 1791. Construction was started by the state of Massachusetts. Maine was part of Massachusetts in 1789, and they ran out of money. And then the federal government took over lighthouses right after that, and President Washington ordered that it be completed, and it was completed in January 1791. And that is the oldest lighthouse in Maine, and it's the third oldest standing lighthouse tower in the country, after Boston Light and Sandy Hook, New Jersey. Although it was altered later in its history, so it's just the top two-thirds of, lower two-thirds of it are the original lighthouse. Okay, maybe we should go to the questions where we have the people who raised their hands.
Absolutely.
Susan has a question.
Yeah, hi, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
This is a Lighthouse Sue from New Jersey. I emailed you several times when I have information about lighthouses. I was looking forward to the trip for tomorrow. I took one of your cruises 2 years ago out of Bar Harbor, and it was wonderful. And even though I'm disappointed in not being able to be in Bar Harbor tomorrow, this presentation has really been great. You're a wonderful person to listen to, and I'm really looking forward to next year. I've already booked my reservation on Bar Harbor Whale, and I have my hotel reservation in Bar Harbor, so I'm definitely going to be there.
Excellent. That's all we like to hear.
Yes. I may look into the Booth Bay Harbor cruise for September, because I'm really trying to get away for a couple of days, and maybe we will take the trip up to November Booth Bay if we're able to in September.
Yeah.
So
well, you did notice that it starts at, what is it, 6 a.m. it starts, Mike?
Yeah, boat leaves at 6, so you want to be at park there. We're going to be meeting about 5:45.
Okay.
And then we head right out 6 o'clock sharp, because we actually catch the sunrise out to sea, and it's a beautiful shot. We see Burnt Island, Ram Island, the Cuckles, and then we wrap up with Hendricks Head. So those are the 4 lighthouses that we see.
I'll look for the information. I'll possibly be booking that, but I'm definitely going to be in Bar Harbor next July to see Jeremy. So,
excellent. Thank you,
very
Susan.
much.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Take it easy.
Nice seeing you. We'll see you next year on board.
Yes. But thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Take care. Okay. Ann has another question. Ann, Papa, where are you, Ann? There you are. Did you have another question, or is your hand up from earlier?
No, it's, I wanted to mention something. I was talking to the folks at Head Harbor earlier this year, and it's going to be even harder to get out there now, because during a storm, that first ladder that goes down to that first beach was washed away. So they were planning on building, an extension on that last ladder to take you a little bit further out. Now they've got to figure out, I think, how to replace that first ladder. So
that is really bad news. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Thank you, I guess. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
We usually go out there once a year and help them, kick off the preservation season. And obviously for other reasons, we didn't get out there this year, but I'm not sure what's going to happen. Yeah. Oh, they're really, really nice people up there. And when we did a U.S. Lighthouse Society tour, you were there, right, Jeff? The tour we did where we couldn't get out there. It was like the weather was horrible. It was almost like a hurricane. But they took us into a church and gave us a talk. They were so nice, those people. That was last year, right? That was seems like ancient history, but it was just last year. It's an amazing group. It's a small group of folks that are their friends of Head Harbor, and they've gotten a lot accomplished over the years. Because when you first went into the light, it was a lot less pristine than it is now. And there was no boardwalk. There was, they've done a lot of work. They've replaced the roofs and.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They've done a great job, and it was so neat seeing that the high school students were giving tours out there, and they were doing a great job when I was out there.
And you still can get a good picture of it, even if you can't walk out there. You can get a good picture of that lighthouse from the mainland. So it's worth a visit, even if you can't walk out there.
Yeah.
That's very true. And it's very photogenic from the water as well. I'll mention that the first time I photographed it from the water was back around 2000 when Matt Green, who, and I don't know if you know him, he runs the whale watch out of Campobello, but he, I went through him and he had a friend take me out on a fishing boat and we circumnavigated Campobello Island. And when we got to Head Harbor, there were 2 bald eagles perched right by the lighthouse. And I said to the guy, I would love to get a shot of the eagles flying in front of the lighthouse. And so he starts yelling and waving his arms and jumping up and down to get the eagles to take off, which of course is highly illegal, I think. But the eagles flew in the wrong direction, so I didn't get a good shot. But I'll never forget that.
Yeah, we've been able to spend the night out there too, and it's a great place for whales. But unfortunately, we're hardly ever there at the right time. So. Right.
Yeah, I saw humpbacks when I was there last year. There were a lot of whales, very visible offshore. Let's see. Diane Kumar has a question. And Diane, you should be able to unmute yourself. Unmute your.
Yes, I had trouble getting information on the cruise for September 12th. That's all.
September 12th. Okay.
I was just trying to send it privately to Michael, so sorry somehow.
No worries. It's at my website. If you go to phototourismbymike.com, it is posted there, and I'll put it up one more time. Can I do that now, real quick, Jeremy?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Okay. By the way, before I do that, I'm going to share my screen.
Whoops, sorry, Mike, I muted you by accident. I was muting Diane and I clicked on you by accident. There you go. You're
okay.
Mike.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yep.
Okay, great. You were talking about East Quoddy Light. Here's one that I took at sunrise on Campobello of East Quoddy. It's a beautiful lighthouse to catch. And of course, when you go across the International Bridge, you lose an hour. So this is at 5:40 a.m., which would be 6:40 a.m. over in Lubec, right? Oh no, 7:40 a.m. I'm messing that up. But it's an hour later on one side. I just know that. Okay, let me see if I can get out of this and get over to the information for the cruise that we're doing here. Okay, if you go to balmydayscruises.com, or you can call them here in Maine at 207-633-2284, and they're taking reservations now. Well, not tonight, but tomorrow you could call them. You might be able to leave a message if you call them tonight. And you can see this poster again if you need to reference this at my website, which is phototourismbymike.com. That gives you a list of the photo tours that I do. You'll get a sense of what I'll be doing next year, because like I say, most all of them, except for this one, has been canceled this year. Hopefully that answers the question. Let me stop my share and go back to you, Jeremy.
Okay. It's an hour later in New Brunswick than it is here.
That's right. That's right.
That it is in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, than it is in New England. Yeah. Okay. I don't see any other hands raised. Do we have any other questions in the, well, I see people talking about the podcast. Hi, Tammy. I see Tammy in there. Yeah, lighthearted, 2 words. You don't look for the podcast as 1 word, lighthearted. It's 2 words, light space hearted. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions in the chat. Do you still have to quarantine for 14 days if you enter Maine? I don't know if you can answer that, Julie. But I know that's changed a bit, but
it depends on certain states.
Yeah.
I know New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, New Jersey, New Hampshire. Am I missing any, Mike?
I think the best answer, go to Maine CDC, because that's a moving target. They're always changing that. And what you might hear tonight could change tomorrow morning. And so I think the best advice, really, Maine CDC. If you go to, I think it's maine.gov, there's places that you can go and learn more about that. And I would go there for the latest information.
Okay. Am I missing anything? And Julie or Jeff or Mike, did anybody see anything else in the chat?
I think you got everything, Jeremy.
Okay.
I'll answer one question that comes up frequently for me with respect to the photography. People will say, I only have a cell phone, should I go? Answer is yes, because a lot of cell phones are very capable these days, and you can make some really wonderful images with those. Usually the night before, I'd be doing a photography program like tonight, and there are some apps that you can download, like Adobe Lightroom is one of my favorite ones, that you can install for free in your cell phone. And if you own an Apple phone, it opens up a lot of capabilities that Apple has taken out. So you can make much better images, and it's free. The other thing is, if you bring a DSLR camera, you want one with a zoom that'll at least go out to 300 millimeter. Now, if you can go to 400, or if you've got like that Tamron super zoom, the 150 to 600, you're doing really well. Those are great lenses to have. You saw that one image of Petit Manan Island with the wispy clouds. That was actually with a wide angle lens, because I wanted to get all those clouds in the shot. So really, what lenses do you need to pack? Bring a good telephoto and a walk around, and you're fine. You don't need to bring your whole bag full of lenses. Just those two will pretty much cover you for all you need. So those are perhaps the biggest questions I get, you know, when you go out on the boat. Don't bring a tripod. There's no advantage to bringing a tripod at all. If you have a lens that's got image stabilization, absolutely bring that. Or if your camera's got that built in, absolutely bring that, because you're on a boat. You're moving, and so everything's moving except for the lighthouses. Thankfully, they're stationary. So point is, anything you can do to stabilize the image is going to help. And there are some other tips that I'm usually on the bow to help people how to set up the cameras to shoot in time value mode so you can stop motion. These are all things that we like to do on board the boat. And I look forward to seeing you all as soon as we can get back out to sea to do these photo tours.
And I just want to add that if you have a chance to see one of Mike's photography presentations, his presentation on digital photography, see it, go to it, whether it's live or online or however it is, check it out, because Mike does a tremendous job with those. So I don't want to miss the chance to say that as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we probably want to start thinking about wrapping things up. Julie, I want to thank everybody for your attendance, your attention today, and remind you to check. I had a slide at the end that I forgot to show with a few sources of information, but let me just mention U.S. Lighthouse Society again, and go to uslhs.org to learn more about all the stuff that the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers, which is a lot. Quarterly magazine, the Keeper's Log, fantastic tours. Of course, this is not the best year for touring, but in a normal year, the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers a variety of domestic international tours that are fantastic. And Skip Sherwood, I don't know if Skip's still here somewhere, but he spoke about the passport program earlier, and Skip has led a number of those tours over the years. And actually, there's going to be a presentation tomorrow, a retrospective on one of those tours in the Baltic region. And Chris Brooks, who is a great tour leader, will be giving that presentation tomorrow at, Jeff, jump in here and give him a little more information on that if you could.
4 o'clock East Coast time.
Yeah, at 1 o'clock West Coast time.
Right.
And figure it out if you're somewhere in between. But
the Baltic region, Estonia, Latvia, and Finland.
Yeah. And I know there's still space in that. So if you want to check it out, go to the U.S. Lighthouse Society Facebook page. There's a link on there. Trying to think, that's probably the best place for people to go to find the link if you don't already have it. So I hope I'm sure we'll see some of the same people there tomorrow. So we'll be seeing you again soon. But again, thank you so much for today. Look forward to seeing you out on the water. So Julie, I don't know if you want to wrap it up.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. As always, I walk away from your presentations learning so much and really appreciating the lighthouse stations more and more. They're so fascinating, their stories, and you do it so well. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.